back to the programming here. Really excited because I think there's tons of conversations happening here about AI. There's lots of conversations happening about blockchain. We get to talk about both of them, right? So that's really exciting. I'd love to give my panelists just a brief opportunity to introduce themselves real quick. We've got a lot of questions I want to get through and cover, so we're going to probably do some sort of rapid fire here. So Sandy, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Sandy Carter. I'm the COO for Unstoppable Domains, which focuses on digital identity. And I also founded Unstoppable Women of Web3 and AI. Thank you for having me.
So my name is Vijay Pravin. I'm originally from India, but living in Munich, the city of Oktoberfest, for the last decade. And I'm the founder and CEO of bitsCrunch. We are into NFT analytics and forensics. And recently we closed one of the fastest ever sale on CoinList history. So yeah.
Congrats. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Meeusen. I'm the head of partnerships at DFINITY. I started DFINITY as the CFO. That's my background. I'm a finance and risk person. As you could imagine, here in Switzerland, I used to work for a little company called Swiss Re, and landed in a blockchain that I thought insurance policy is the best example to write smart contracts.
Thanks, Paul.
Hey everyone, Tom Duff Gordon. So I'm the VP of International Policy here at Coinbase. So kind of my job based in London, the unenviable task of talking with governments and regulators kind of all around the world and trying to convince them that, you know, money and financial assets are all coming on chain.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, Sandy, let's start with you. So let's talk about AI and blockchain. How and why is AI really a driving force behind blockchain and sort of the future evolution of the technology?
So this is a big question. So what I see is that AI is actually going to drive the adoption of blockchain even faster than it's going today. And how do I see that? Well, Unstoppable, our unicorn company, is a digital identity company. And by being based on chain, it's now verifiable someone's identity. And one of the biggest problems that we see in AI is the problem of deep fakes. I just did a keynote for a group of 150 CEOs, and they told me their biggest issue is how do we deal with all the bots that are out there and all of the deep fakes that are out there. So by using and leveraging blockchain, now you can do a trust verification that something that you publish, whether it's text or video or a picture, is actually real and verifiable. So I don't know if you guys remember the Pope, when he was seen in a Bauman puffer jacket, went viral, 3 million views of that post. Bauman was really rocking it. And then it turned out that that was a picture created by AI, and it was a fake. It was a fake picture. So many people felt like they were fooled. But imagine if instead that picture had had a verified check on it that said the Pope basically authorized this with a check mark, so you could tell that that picture came from the Pope or not. That is the power I see of blockchain plus artificial intelligence, and something that we have now patented at Unstoppable.
Thank you, Sandy. So, I mean, a lot of things about blockchain are about trust, right? So, Vijay, let's turn to you, because there's lots of fraud, right? There's lots of malicious activities on blockchain. So how do you think about blockchain, and how can AI really be utilized to accelerate that trust and combat fraud and malicious activities on blockchain?
Yeah. So if you see what's stopping people from getting into the digital asset space, it's mainly the trust, right? I mean, that's where people were not really sure if they have to really get into it because somebody is talking about it, right? And that's what we are aiming to solve using bitsCrunch. So we would love to be the chain analysis of the NFT space, where we see if there are any wash trades happening in the space, and not just wash trades, but the money laundering effect coming into the NFT space. That is also something that we are tracking. And we use AI. I mean, since inception of bitsCrunch, we use AI, not just because ChatGPT is now the talk of the town. And we use AI for detecting the fair price of NFTs. Because people heavily rely on floor price, but you want something else on top of floor price. And that is something that we develop in bitsCrunch. And also, as Sandy rightly mentioned, you are not really sure if that asset is real or fake, right? Because anybody can take that out and then put it on a different blockchain or a different marketplace. So we are also helping brands prevent their IPs using bitsCrunch tools. So yeah, in a way, we want to put back the trust among people, those who are uncertain. I mean, this crowd is packed because we all believe in this ecosystem. But for those who are uncertain, that is where we want to put back the trust, and we believe we could do that in the next years. I mean, we are not a unicorn yet, but would love to be there.
You're well on your way, it sounds like. So, any investors, let's get this next unicorn here. So, Paul, let's talk a little bit more about AI and blockchain, specifically related to the data sets, right? Like, what value does this blockchain source data play when it comes to AI? And maybe you can talk a little bit about how that data can be used to create better trained models. We all know that the things we see sometimes spit out of ChatGPT that's wrong or just completely inaccurate, a lot of it is because the data models weren't full, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. I think it can work both ways, actually, blockchain using AI technology and vice versa. So what I mean with that is we know what blockchain is good at, right? So instant settlement of transactions, peer-to-peer, cryptographically insured and tokenized, right? Okay. If you think about that, often in these smart contract execution, you need some external data to look up, like programmers call that a query call. Let's say a credit score, a medical record. And typically, blockchains can do that. They call it oracles. But I think a much more advanced than querying an oracle is interacting with an AI bot. And that's what I find fascinating. That's AI bots giving that input, which is a bit more advanced than just so-called querying an oracle. At the same time, I think if I talk to my blockchain colleagues, and in general, what we all wonder is, well, the AI model will be as good as the inputs of a data and the model that you train. And if you think about that, well, actually, one thing that blockchain technology is very good at is ensuring tamper-proof data, both its inputs, its code, and its next state, right? So I have to be careful. I'm an economist. I'm surrounded by 300 cryptographers at DFINITY who all have a PhD. I'm the only one without a PhD in science or math. But it's still as having spent so many years in insurance fighting fraud, I think that's quite fascinating because it's so important, not just for social media, which I'm less an expert on, but also in business transactions, to relying on very true, untampered data. And the richness of a model, but at the same time, technology that mathematically can basically verify tamper-proof data, that's the nice cohesion between these two technologies, I think.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paul. So, Tom, let's switch gears. You mentioned regulation. You mentioned international policy. I'm sure you're speaking to these regulators all the time. Let's first start and just talk about, how do you see the future when it comes to regulation? Like, what conversations are happening in these back rooms? How is Coinbase influencing these conversations to be good for all of us?
Okay, so just a small question. But look, I'm delighted we're having this conversation because not just on the street, when you walk past all the AI house, it's kind of just tons and tons. It's the hype thing. It's the hype topic. It's the hot topic. I think it was last year. It is this year. When you talk to policymakers, they're all, and whether it's from the US or the Middle East and others, they all recognize that getting control of AI, understanding it, regulating it, the opportunities, the disadvantages, is a massive thing that they have to do, and it's a priority. But what they're not doing is connecting the two conversations. And that is why this conversation I was so excited to be part of, because what I'm trying to do in the conversations with the policymakers, they want to talk about AI, less so about kind of blockchain, and we'll get onto the fraud and all of those kind of conversations as Coinbase we deal with the whole time. But we're trying to say to them, hey, there's a marriage here. There is a really important marriage for all of the reasons that the panelists have kind of said. And let's not just say, hey, it's one set of conversations about AI and a totally different set of conversations about how we regulate blockchain. So one of the things I think we can all do, and I think at Coinbase we can do, given a little bit our market positioning, is to kind of make sure that we kind of try and join the dots. And we simplistically try and break it down into the kind of, a few sets of A's, right? So how are we going to use AI and blockchain together? Well, one is kind of analysis. It's been talked about. We use it internally for some of our transaction monitoring and some of our blockchain analysis, those types of things. The other is automation. Like, we're going to see a future of Internet of Things, all of these smart appliances making decisions based on AI. A lot of those decisions will have value transfer kind of associated with them, and we're going to have to track that on a ledger. Like, these appliances aren't going to be using Visa and MasterCard, right? Why not? Well, because a lot of these kind of transactions are going to be micro, and that doesn't work in the current payment system. But also, like, my fridge or my car isn't going to get a bank account. I don't know how they're going to KYC that. Okay, so we do believe that tokens and blockchain, like with AI and with kind of more bots and more of these kind of appliances and IoT, is going to be a big deal. But then probably the biggest one, which I think Sandy talked about, is authentication. So that's the kind of the third A that we kind of see here. If we think that what does AI do? AI scales content, and what does blockchain do? It scales trust, right? Which I think you also spoke about. So let's bring those things together. Content, amazing content, new novel content, and trust as well. So we know what is created by a bot and what's created by a human by embedding these little flags in the metadata and all of those things that you can do. That's a topic actually which does resonate a bit this year. I think another hot topic on Davos Promenade is about the elections that are happening globally. And so we've got, whatever it is, 3-point-something billion, so 40%, 50% of the population voting in elections, the most since 1980. Deep fakes, Sandy, you talked about, fake news, deep fakes, who said this, who didn't say it, et cetera, photograph of somebody shaking hands with somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. It would be very good, and I think all governments have a self-interest in making sure that the political discourse is kind of informed by doesn't care what your opinion is, but the data should come from kind of humans and be verifiable. So I think, analysis, automation, and then authenticity, these are some of the ways in which I think we want to connect these two disparate conversations and try and drag blockchain a little bit into the other realm. I can talk a lot about regulation, but maybe leave that for the second round.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tom. So one of the things about Web3 that I love is the community aspect, is bringing people together. And you talk about sort of bridging that gap between policy, regulation, and blockchain. Like, that's all about building partnerships and community. One question, though, as a follow-up I have is, like, do they get it, right? Like, some regulators and politicians, I know, like, they don't know how to, like, reset their password, right? And you're talking to them about blockchain and AI. Like, are they receptive? Do they get it? Are they scared? Like, what's the feeling in the room?
It completely depends on who you're talking to. It totally depends on who you're talking to. I mean, look, if I just do a quick kind of sketch of the markets that I cover, I mean, I think in the Middle East, they kind of get it and they kind of plan and they think for kind of 25 years, 50 years, it's an oil diversification play, very exciting things happening there. Japan, financial center, they've had kind of blockchain kind of rules for a few years now. Hong Kong is moving in the right direction. Singapore similarly. Brazil passing laws this year. Canada is happening. Stablecoin rules in Europe go live this year. The UK is developing a framework. So everybody's on that journey. I think the big interesting ones to watch are places like India, right? Huge opportunity for Web3 in India. I think they see that potential, but again, this conversation around, can we trust it, fraud and scams, and that is the biggest, it's the explainability of what blockchain is and does, and then it's getting past these headlines around the kind of fraud and scams off the back of a difficult year where we had some very high profile kind of like stories coming up. So it's very much depends on who you're talking to, but the people who do get it tend to be the governments, and then the regulators, that's a separate story, right? Because the incentives are skewed in different directions, and so that's, that can be a harder task, but we're on the journey.
Thank you, Tom. Sandy, a follow-up.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things that I'm most concerned about being from the United States, with such a big power, is that I don't see the regulators or the government taking the time to really learn about the technology. So I was in the Middle East, and I met with very high-level government officials who understood blockchain. Like, I didn't have to start from ground zero. I see it in Singapore. I've seen it across the ways that I've traveled. But we had a delegation that went to DC, and one of the things that we found was that most of the senators and representatives sent staff member or a staff member of a staff member or a staff member of a staff member or a staff member to learn about it, which meant it's going to be translated 3 or 4 times. And I think it's really important that education in this space happen both on the blockchain side and on the AI side.
Paul.
I think the key thing is dialogue, right? So I wasn't born here, but I've lived here for 20 years now, so I've negotiated with FINMA, with all possible Swiss tax authorities. We're just a small little country, but hopefully since last night we're about to negotiate peace in Ukraine. My point is, I think this little FINMA regulator has actually done not a bad job. It's details aside, like they introduced the DLT regulation very quickly. They recently adjusted it. The tax authorities then followed suit, etc. But that's content. I think the other thing is also attitude. I often need to tell my colleagues as well when I hear things like, these idiots, they don't know what they're talking about. I need to tell them also, you're a very sophisticated cryptographer, but you need to perhaps use a slightly different language when you walk into the government office. That's what I mean with attitude and mindset, and that helps a lot. And I think in hindsight, over here, the openness on both sides has grown.
Great. Well, I really appreciate everyone's comments and thoughts there. Tom, did you have something else to add?
I was just going to say, I mean, I agree with the education point. The other thing that we can do as an industry, I think, is develop use cases. Right, because it's these staffers, I mean, rather than having to explain 3 times over kind of, what a hash is, how the blockchain works, the difference between proof of stake and proof of work, why Ethereum is a smart contract platform is slightly different to blockchain, et cetera, that's really hard. But if you can say, hey, you can just kind of download a wallet, you can transfer money seamlessly around the world for absolutely zero. And actually, I think in some of these high inflation economies, we're really excited. We've announced some partnerships across Africa and some of these emerging markets. I mean, Brian Armstrong's view is that almost this year we might move back to kind of the founding principle of kind of payments as a use case, and that may be through stable coins and potentially through things like Bitcoin. That could be a bit of a breakout. But I think my broader point is we need tangible use cases, right? Governments can use this technology to provide their own government services, but commercial applications as well. Things where the user experience is seamless and people can not just trade, but we can really genuinely use it, and that will help hugely to advance the regulatory conversation in my mind.
Thank you, Tom. Let's talk a little bit about use cases. You mentioned payments, of course, very, very obvious use case, very important use case. Anyone else have any use cases around, like, specifically things that will accelerate the adoption of AI and blockchain? Sandy, go ahead.
So, well, first of all, I agree with the use case of payments. If I just look at what we do with Unstoppable, and I think this is pretty interesting because, the market's not the best right now. We do 30 million resolutions for a crypto wallet every week. 30 million, and we're just one of the naming services. We are the largest, but I think that's a lot given where we are in the market. The other use case that I think is really powerful is loyalty. I think this is a use case where we actually don't have to speak about the technology, but we can talk about the power that it brings. Identification of a real person using something. The way that we look at providing a reward, showing something that's not a paper passport to get something, but to actually have it digitally sitting there inside of your digital wallet or your digital identity, I think is very powerful. So for example, for Gary Vee, we have an NFT that sits inside of your digital identity where if you have it, you get in the front of the line for a selfie, which is very valuable in most places in the world. You guys all know Gary Vee? Yeah, okay, great, okay.
Do you have a selfie with him?
I do. All right. So those are some of the things. We also see having multiple tickets in your wallet being showcased for being able to give a discount. And just another funny one, so we have the Super Bowl in the US, which is American football, and I was talking to the guys at the NFL, and they told me that if everybody who tweeted about going to the Super Bowl actually went to the Super Bowl, the stadium would be 5 times as big as it is. So now they have an NFT that can sit inside of your digital identity so you can actually verify, back to that trust verification we were talking about, verify that you went there. And then one more example, education. I was talking to LinkedIn. 36% of people who have a school on their LinkedIn profile did not go to that school. Now, how do you know which of the 36% they are? But with a digital identity, you have a soul-bound token, which means you can't transfer it. That soul-bound token sits inside of your digital identity, and now you can't transfer it to someone, but you can prove I actually went to the school that I said. So I think there is some really powerful use cases that use the value of the technology, but we can talk about the business outcome, not necessarily just the technology.
Thanks, Sandy. Those are some great use cases. Paul, I'd love to go to you and hear any use cases on your side. But first, I want you to answer, of all those PhDs you're surrounded with, how many of them actually have that verified?
Well, our CTO is here tomorrow. Ask him. I hope he made the right calls. Well, my daughter actually got her master's degree from the same ETH, which is a little university here. I went to the ceremony. I thought it was real. But identity... I think identity is interesting. I said I'm an insurance guy, so you can imagine identity in life insurance. And so one thing we've worked on at Internet Computer with DFINITY is something called internet identity. I think it exemplifies a little bit that in the crypto crowd, we must admit we have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with identity, right? When it suits us, we want things to be fully anonymous. But when things are anonymous, the bad things can happen that Sandy was describing, right? The notion of an internet identity that we've developed is kind of like a single sign-on. At the moment when you use that, there's no disclosure of your personhood. It's like an anchor. Think of it as a simplified single sign-on across all your blockchain interactions. However, you then may get interactions where it's necessary. For example, proof of adulthood. Well, proof of adulthood is actually a simple question with a binary answer. Why should the door watcher at the club see the young girl's passport with her address? He should have an answer to a binary question. Right? So it's a little example. We call that verified credentials. So for that entrance, you need one piece of verified credential. To be onboarded with Coinbase, I need a whole set of verified credentials. And disclosing these verified credentials for the purpose of the transaction and just that counterparty, and be limited to that, that is like an interesting use case that we've been working on.
Thank you, Paul. Vijay, real quick, I'd love you to answer the question, then we'll go to one final question and end on time for Sagar here.
Yeah, I mean, I see loyalty as also one of the biggest use cases, and along with that, gaming. I mean, Animuka having invested in a lot of gaming. Everybody talks about Web3 gaming for the last few years, and I somehow feel that it is coming this season, this cycle, because a lot of games have been building since early last cycle, and it takes time. That is what people need to understand. Everybody thinks that, okay, gaming, then they pour millions or billions of dollars and they expect something overnight. It doesn't happen that way, right? And I strongly believe that gaming will be massive and it can easily onboard millions of users in this cycle, and that's what I believe, on top of what the others said.
Thank you, Vijay. All right, so last question. Each of you can take 30 seconds or so to answer it. What's, looking over the next 12 months, sort of predictions, right? What's one key collaboration or innovation that you feel is really going to accelerate the adoption of blockchain and AI most amazingly? Who wants to start? Paul, it looks like you've got an answer.
30 seconds. With one word, democratize. And this is not hold hands and sing a song of peace. This is democratize the utilization, the moderation, and the sharing of data. And the key to do that, in my view, is something most of us know: decentralized autonomous organizations, where the content provider, the content user, perhaps also the moderator, is incentivized to do that. Crypto micropayments are an excellent way of doing that. And if you stake those tokens, then you actually give people a vote. Liquid democracy. There's examples of that already. I wish we see more.
Thank you, Paul. Vijay, go ahead.
To me, it's education. So the more people get educated in the space, the more they get to see the reality, right? I mean, look at Larry Fink from not supporting to now being bullish. I can call it that way. So I would say education. So that's going to be the massive thing. So let's educate people tirelessly. Let's keep on going. And then evangelists like Yat or Anthony Saramucci and all these folks who are in this room, I strongly believe that wherever we go, we talk about Web3, blockchain, and the nuances of it. then the world will slowly step into it.
Thanks, Vijay. Tom, let's go to you, and then we'll finish with Sandy.
Yeah, so for me, I think the big theme for Coinbase, the big theme for this year is obviously economic freedom, right? And people kind of realizing that this technology actually helps them. So we just signed a deal with a company called Yellow Card, which gives us access to about 50% of the population in Africa, where the average inflation is more than 20%, something like that. And we're going to effectively give them free access to USDC, and they're going to be able to receive that, and they're going to be able to send it all for free on Base, our Layer 2 blockchain. Like that, I think, is going to be huge. If people realize they can do that, they can save, and their savings and their earnings are not going to be eroded by the mismanagement, fiscally or monetary, by whatever system they live in. I think that could be extremely powerful, and we're hoping there'll be a lot of adoption. And it's not just going to be USDC, right? It'll be Bitcoin and these other things, but when people living in Venezuela, in Turkey, in Argentina, in parts of Africa, when they start to realize the power of these tools, and we bring down the cost, right, of actually kind of like transacting, that I think is going to drive adoption.
Thank you, Tom.
So I think a big use case is going to be around community. And you can see it here at Davos, where people are talking about mental health and loneliness. Even since COVID, loneliness has gone up considerably. The number one use case for AI is actually not ChatGPT, but it's actually the companion apps. I don't know if you guys have been checking those out, but it's the companion apps. And so from our perspective at Unstoppable, we see a lot of things that can help connect each other and to build tribes and to build communities being something that will be hot over the next year. So for example, we've just worked with Push Protocol and XMTP and Coinbase to develop messaging. So anybody can message. If you have a digital ID, you can message each other. And I think some of that connection, that human connection, is going to be really important as we move into 2024.
Amazing. Thank you all to my panelists, and let's see what's next.
Thank you, Scott.